Hello everyone, I'm Nizzahon, and welcome to another MTG Top 10 here on the Aether Hub. In these videos, I delve into the archives of Magic's tournament records to discover what the 10 best cards are in a particular category. Today, we're looking at avatars, a creature type many people have asked me to do, and I'm finally doing it. Many creature types are really focused in a particular color or colors, but avatars occur across all colors. This is because an avatar in Magic is a creature that is simply a representation of a powerful being or the physical embodiment of some ideal or emotion that does not normally have physical form. This means that they can embody ideals of any color. We get avatars in most blocks, and in total, there have been 65 avatar creatures printed, along with 3 cards that produce avatar tokens. Generally, avatars are quite powerful, and they all, at least in their original printing, appear at rare or higher. In this video, we're going to look at the 10 best creatures with the avatar creature type, or cards that can produce avatar tokens, based on how well they have done at the highest level of tournament play. Before we get started, let me give you a quick reminder on how I score these lists. Cards receive points depending on how many Grand Prix or Pro Tour Top 8s they've received, with the Pro Tour Top 8 worth twice as much as a Grand Prix Top 8. The cards in this list are ranked numbers 10 through 1, with the highest score being found at number 1. I count Legacy and Vintage Championship events as Pro Tour Top 8s as well, so that those formats can be reflected in the score of the cards. So let's go ahead and get started with number 10. At number 10 we have World Queller, which seems to be an embodiment of the Earth on the plane of Zendikar, a plane where the Earth coming alive isn't all that strange. World Queller's stats for 5 mana aren't great, it's just a 4/4. However, it has a very powerful upkeep trigger that allows you to make both yourself and your opponent sacrifice a permanent of the chosen type. This is especially good because you get to choose the permanent type, which generally means you can pick what hurts your opponent the most and hurts you the least. An effect that hits everyone is nice in EDH, and World Queller sees some play there, but it also has a bit of a resume at the Pro Tour, with 2 top 8s at standard events, with the top 8 at Worlds in 2009 in Rome, in a Bant mid-range deck, and at Pro Tour San Diego in 2010 in an Abzan mid-range deck. At number 9 we have Serra Avatar, who is the embodiment of Serra, who was a pre-mending planeswalker who created her own plane known as Serra's Realm. The Avatar was of her creation and allowed her to have a presence on Dominaria without actually leaving her plane. Some of you may already know from my other videos that I started playing in Urza's Saga, the set that Serra Avatar appeared in, and as a result this card is pretty nostalgic for me, and was one of my favorite cards when I first started playing because it was one of the first rares I ever got. I shoved it into any deck I could because I thought a creature who could potentially be a 20/20 was awesome, and well, it turns out it is pretty good. Good enough to have done some things at the premier level of tournament play. Its first time in Standard, it managed a top 8 at Worlds, in a deck called Chimera that could cheat huge creatures into play with Pattern of Rebirth. It also put up 2 top 8s in 2005 in the extended format, one in a deck that specialized in life gain, meaning that the avatar could be even bigger than 20/20, and the other in a deck running Sneak Attack, which allowed you to cheat the avatar into play. Serra Avatar got another shot at Standard 2 after being reprinted in Magic 2013, and it put up a single top 8 in that Standard as well. At number 8 we have Autumn Willow, a creature who is meant to be an embodiment of nature. I realize that on the screen the card just says Legend, but it has been errated to Legendary Creature Avatar. The Willow is a 4/4 with Shroud. Shroud that can basically be turned into hexproof if you're willing to pay 1 green mana, so it gets around the downside most Shroud cards have, that you can't actually target your own guy with anything either. Certainly not an impressive creature by today's standard, but back when this was printed in Homelands, having a 4/4 who couldn't die to removal was pretty sweet. Autumn Willow got all of her points at a single Pro Tour in 1996, Pro Tour New York. There she appeared in 3 different aggro decks, 2 green-white aggro decks, and a green-white-red aggro deck, where she could serve as a curve topper that was difficult to remove. At number 7 we have Soul of Innistrad, part of an entire cycle of avatars that are meant to represent one of Magic's planes. Soul of Innistrad is the only member of that cycle to make this list. All the cards in this cycle are 6 mana 6/6s with a keyword ability, an activated ability, and an activated ability that the creature could use from the graveyard in addition to exiling itself. Soul of Innistrad saw more play than the other members of this cycle because its effect generates insane card advantage. Paying 5 mana when it is in play to get 3 creatures back from your graveyard will win you a lot of grindy games, and even if your soul ends up in the graveyard, it can give you some insane value. Doesn't hurt that it has a huge body either. The soul saw play in Standard, primarily in Sultai Whip decks, which were reanimation decks built around Whip of Erebos. So these decks liked throwing cards in the graveyard and getting them back with the Whip. This meant that if your soul got milled by your mill effects, you could still use its ability from the graveyard, or you could just reanimate it for a turn to smash your opponent. It saw some fringe play in non-whip decks, picking up 1 Grand Prix top 8 in an Abzan mid-range deck, and another in a Sultai aggro deck, but the whip deck was its primary home. At number 6, we have Avatar of Woe, who, like Soul of Innistrad, was part of an entire cycle of avatars. Also like the Soul, the black member of the cycle ended up being the best and is the only one to make this list. This cycle of avatars from Prophecy could all cost far less if a certain requirement was met, and they each represented a specific color, and one of the central ideas of that color. For black, that was Woe. Potentially only costing 2 mana, having fear and the ability to destroy creatures by just tapping, Avatar of Woe is very strong. Despite all that power, Avatar of Woe did not see play in Standard. This is because meeting the requirement of 10 creatures in the graveyard was hard to achieve there, and there also weren't that many good ways to cheat an 8 mana creature into play. So she only saw play in Extended, appearing in various Reanimator decks. She was great there because those decks already liked filling their graveyard with creatures, meaning sometimes you could just cast her from your hand for 2 mana, and if she got milled, reanimating her wasn't bad either. At Pro Tour New Orleans in 2001, an Extended Pro Tour, the Avatar picked up 2 top 8s in mono black Reanimator decks, and she was in another Reanimator deck at Pro Tour Houston in 2002 and at Grand Prix New Orleans in 2003. To this day, she's a staple in EDH, but she hasn't seen play in a long while. At number 5, we have Dark Depths, a card that isn't always an avatar, but it makes one. A Merit Lage avatar who's indestructible and has flying and is a 20/20. Merit Lage was sort of Emrakul before Emrakul, being a massive, tentacled, godlike being that was imprisoned on Dominaria in ice. This card is very cool flavor-wise because it represents the frozen Merit Lage, but if you can do enough work, you can set her free. This card didn't seem too great though when it was printed. Having to invest a total of 30 mana into Dark Depths to get your Merit Lage avatar on a land that didn't produce mana either didn't seem very good. As a result, Dark Depths did not see play in the standard format. However, cards would be printed later that enabled silly combos that gave you Merit Lage at the very early points of games, meaning you could kill your opponent quite quickly. The first of these combos was an Extended and involved Vampire Hexmage, who could sacrifice itself to remove all the ice counters from Dark Depths and allow the avatar to emerge and end the game. The Hexmage was banned shortly after this combo was discovered, but only after Dark Depths managed to top 8 a Pro Tour and a Grand Prix in the format. More recently, Dark Depths has been seeing play in Legacy Lands decks that get their name because they are composed primarily of lands, and ways to tutor for and abuse those lands, with most versions of the deck running 34 or 35 lands. This deck also tries to make Merit Lage as early as possible, but instead of using Hexmage, it uses Thespian Stage to make a copy of Dark Depths. The stage then has no counters on it and immediately creates the Merit Lage avatar token. The Lands deck finished in the top 8 of the 2015 Legacy Championship and has put up several Grand Prix top 8s in the format as well, as recently as Grand Prix Las Vegas earlier this year, and it seems like a likely candidate to continue to add to its score. At number 4, we have Acon Chronicler, who appears to be an embodiment of knowledge, perhaps more specifically historical knowledge, given what a chronicle is. The Chronicler has power and toughness equal to the number of cards in your hand, which isn't too bad for control decks, but the real value here is in the Chronicler's suspendability, which allows you to draw an extra card every turn that it remains suspended, providing a very good source of card advantage that eventually enters the battlefield as a huge creature. The Chronicler saw play mostly in block decks, which included Pickles, so named because of the card Brine Elemental, Blue-Green Control Goyf, and Mystical Teachings decks. It also saw a little bit of play in Standard, managing 2 top 8s in the Standard version of Pickles. At number 3, we have an avatar that just 2 years ago would not have made this list, but has since risen to Tier 1 status in Modern and managed to rise all the way to number 3 on this list, and that is Death's Shadow. This avatar seems to simply be an embodiment of death, and it has a very cool design. A 1-mana 13/13 that gets smaller the more life you have. Nobody thought the avatar was very good after its initial printing, sort of like Dark Depths, and as a result it didn't see play in Standard. That Standard format did not have good ways to control your life total, but today's Modern format does. Still, it took until 2016 for people to realize Death Shadow's true potential. Modern Death Shadow decks make sure to use up a bunch of their life with fetch lands, shock lands, cards with Phyrexian mana, and cards like Thoughtseize, and they can often pump the Death Shadow up to incredible size very quickly and end the game with combat tricks like Temur Battle Rage and Become Immense, often using both of those. As I said, there is a Tier 1 deck in Modern that is named for this once bulk rare, sometimes simply called Death Shadow, and others opting for the more descriptive Death Shadow Zoo. Some thought the banning of Gitaxian Probe from Modern was going to spell the end of Death Shadow, since that card gave you valuable information about your opponent's hand and helped you decide whether or not it was wise to use your Temur Battle Rage or whatnot, while also lowering your life because it was a Phyrexian mana card. But the Shadows continue to be a dominant card and a dominant deck in Modern even without the Probe, and it has a good chance at taking the number 1 spot on this list with just 2 more years of Modern dominance. At number 2, we have Progenitus, who, like Soul of Innistrad and the other cards of that cycle, is an embodiment of a plane, though it isn't actually part of that cycle. It's the same sort of avatar, described as the soul of the world in its own flavor text, and that world is the plane of Oueller. Progenitus, until very recently, was the only card in Magic with protection from everything. These words make Progenitus insanely hard to kill, however, he is also insanely difficult to cast, and, as a result, Progenitus has not been cast for his mana cost very often, with players instead finding ways to cheat it into play, since once it is in play, it can just win you the game. Because strong reanimation spells and cards that let you put cards into play for free are basically never printed anymore, Progenitus mostly sees play in Legacy, where it can be cheated into play with Sneak Attack and Show and Tell. It has also seen play in Legacy Elves decks, where Natural Order can be used to cheat it into play. It also has a top 8 in Modern in a mono-blue Infect deck, and if that sounds like a strange deck for a 5-color card to be in, then you're right, but that deck never intended on getting Progenitus into play at all, instead planning on using Blazing Shoal and pitching Progenitus to give +10/+10 to an Infect creature and instantly win the game. This combo eventually led to Blazing Shoal getting banned out of Modern, since it was far too potent with Infect creatures capable of winning the game on turn 2. Progenitus hasn't seen play in Legacy since 2016, as other creatures have usurped it in Sneak and Show decks, but it stands a chance at finding its way back into a few deck lists. At number 1, we have Ajani Goldmane. I struggled some with whether or not I should include Ajani on this list. His ultimate ability does allow him to make an avatar token with power and toughness equal to your life total, which is a callback to Sarah Avatar, who also made this list, but that ability is used very rarely. Still, it is used sometimes, and the threat of that activated ability is certainly relevant when playing against this Planeswalker, so in the end I elected to include him. One of the original Planeswalkers from Lorwyn, Ajani's main application has been in aggro decks, where his -1 is a powerful way of pumping your entire team. In block, this primarily meant mono-white Kithkin decks, which were the white weenie decks of the time, built around the Kithkin tribe, and in standard, this was in black-white token decks. Ajani hasn't seen play in non-rotating formats, though, so cards like Death's Shadow have a real chance of passing it with a little more time. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button. In the comments, don't forget to let us know what your favorite avatar is, and if you want to make sure you catch a bunch of great MTG content from a variety of creators, don't forget to subscribe here to the Aether Hub.